Hello everyone, my name is Eddie Bole. I'm the pastor at Midway United Methodist Church. I'm also the pastor at Edgewater United Methodist Church. I want to thank you so much for taking some time and for watching this video. Hope that it is helpful for you in your spiritual growth and in your spiritual formation. I would like to invite you, if you are at all interested, if you would like to come and meet in person. We are meeting for worship in the sanctuary at Edgewater United Methodist Church at 9:20 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Also, we are meeting for worship in person at Midway United Methodist Church at 10:45 a.m. All of you are invited to come and be a part of either one of those worship services, or you could come and be a part of both of them. I do want to remind you that as we continue in this season and in this period of COVID-19, that we are continuing to wear masks when we come to worship. This includes when you're in the parking lot, when you're around the church, when you're throughout the halls and everything. A mask that covers your mouth as well as your nose. Also maintaining social distancing, at least 6 to 10 feet from people that you're not living in the same household with. And before you plan to come, go ahead and just pay attention to your own body. If you have any symptoms, if you're sick, please use that. Take that as an opportunity to stay home. If you find yourself with a fever, do not come and be a part of the worship time. In the meantime, hope that you enjoy this video. There's this place in the Gospel of Luke that it's one verse that I have really enjoyed. It's one that I carry with me often, and it is Luke chapter 18, starting with the very first verse. And this is what then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. And that idea about praying, which, this is what we sort of expect from Jesus. It's sort of what you would expect if you come into a congregation. If you come into a church, you're going to expect, that you're going to see prayer, that you're going to even be invited to participate in prayer. But imagine this: not lose heart. I pray that you will. Jesus tells them a parable about their need to pray, and then also don't lose heart. And I think that's one of those things that all of us, that when we come together in church, that this is part of what we do together, that we hold each other together, and not only in church, but in other communities, in our families, in community gatherings, when we do this at work, when we do it at school. I think that in troubling times, that we always try to hold each other together and say, you can't give up, don't lose heart. But I think that it just comes across as something that we don't really intentionally develop. It's not something that we intentionally do with each other about this importance of losing heart. One of the things that I've just come across, that I've just come through, is this time and this period as we were coming up to the elections. As I took that as an opportunity for a couple of days at least. I used that as an opportunity for a few days to fast from the news. That is, to stay away from all the news, to stay away from reading the newspaper, which is something that I enjoy doing, listening to the news on the radio when I'm in the car, another thing that I enjoy doing, and also not watching it on TV. And this actually came out of a conversation. It came out of some other people that said, what? Someone just said, I watched this wonderful movie, and I slept so well. I had such a peace. You could say, in a sense, that this is a person who didn't lose heart. And so I took that. There was already this idea, this seed that was beginning in the back of my mind. As soon as I heard that testimony, I said, that's something I've got to do too. And so for me, it wasn't a movie, but it was Parks and Recreation. Couldn't get too far away from elections and couldn't get too far away from government. So we watched that, and I suggested my family to watching Parks and Recreation. I said, I hope you don't mind. And then we started doing it and started watching it. But then I did, like everyone else did, went Tuesday morning and voted, and then came back that evening, watched went through work, and then came back that evening, watched some episodes of Parks and Recreation, and then turned on the results from the election. Stayed up way too late watching the results from the election. But one of the things that is so extraordinary is that it is easy to lose our hearts. And it is easy that even when we begin to have those kinds of experiences where we are fasting for something, where we are really focused on our hearts and saying, you know what, this is going to be a moment. This is going to be a time when I am going to guard my heart. Another thing that Jesus invites us to do, that we are going to guard our hearts and that we are going to keep our hearts in a place where they are not corrupted, a place, that we can find hope. And so we can focus on that. We can pay great attention to that for a while. And how easy can we begin to slip away into this? Now, Jesus says that he is going to tell us and he is going to invite us into a parable. That is a story that is sort of going to be, you can read it in a couple of ways. You can read it as this straightforward account, but a parable has a little bit more. There's a little bit of a twist that is invited there. So I invite you into this parable, this story that has a twist that kind of hooks us into the story, that invites us to see ourselves in the middle of the story. And it is a story about praying always, and it is one about not losing heart. And I want to make it explicit in saying that in this moment that I hope that it is a place for you, that you are determined and that you are settling in yourself to say, you know what, I'm going to really begin to make explicit this experience of not losing heart. Now, the parable that Jesus tells, and again, this is Luke chapter 18, starting at verse 1. But the parable that Jesus tells is this one that says, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for the people. And in that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, grant me justice against my opponent. So you see this. So you see what is happening, that there is this judge that is there who neither feared God nor had respect for people. And in that city there was a widow who kept coming to him. That's one of the things to pay attention to. So imagine this widow that kept coming to him and says, grant me justice against my opponent. For a while he refused, but later he began to say to himself, that is, the judge began to say to himself, though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming. And so he says, even though I've got nothing to gain, because, I'm not afraid of what God might do to me. I'm not afraid of I'm not afraid of anything that might happen to me, that might take place in my life. But because this widow is going to continue to bother me, it is just going to be this nagging little incident, this nagging effect on me. Says, you know what, I'm going to do something. I'm suddenly going to do something about it. And what I think is so remarkable about this parable is that Jesus invites us to reflect on someone who is clearly in this parable, who is a person that is clearly lost heart. There's someone that is just part of this job and part of this career that they're in. The judge, as Luke reminds us, in a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. And so this is what Luke tells us. It says it's an unnamed judge. It says that it was in a certain city. So there's a lot of generalized ideas about this judge that is here, which is to say, you know what, it can happen to any of us. That it can happen to any of us. That when we're going through our everyday lives, that we're going through those everyday moments like that, that we can completely ignore what is taking place, what is happening right in front of us. And so we find this judge who has lost heart. And he says, and even confesses, he says, this? Well, though I have no fear of God, no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming. So it isn't his heart that he is hoping to gain, but it is just the stamina to keep on doing what he has continued to do. Why would you settle for that? And I believe that has to be the question that all of us have to ask ourselves, is that why would we settle for something less than who we truly are? You see, one of the things about us as far as human beings is that we are people who are created to live lives with our whole hearts and our whole selves. We are people who are created, and we are people who are molded and shaped by God to bring our whole lives into everything that we are doing. You see, what this judge has come to do is he has come to realize that the best that he can hope for in this world is that he can have a little bit of stamina to continue to do what he is doing day in and day out, so that he can continue to judge in this way, so that he can just have a little bit of stamina just to continue going. And this widow, in her persistence, not in her rhetoric, not in her powers of persuasion, not in the lawyer that she has mortgaged her home to provide, to come and to plead her case before the judge, but just in her consistency. And that is the key that comes into this parable that Jesus tells, is the consistency of this woman. We see right before our eyes what the life of someone who has already lost heart, what it begins to look like. We see the judge who neither fears God nor has any respect for anybody else, but just hopes to get a little bit of stamina so that he can continue in the life that he is living. And we see someone who is living with her whole heart, who comes and continues every day to come to this judge who has no fear of God, no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming. And then the Lord said, this is what Jesus says, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? See, one of the promises that we do have from God is that as we continue to plead our case, that as we continue to come to God, and it doesn't have to be a perfect prayer, it doesn't have to be a worship-filled prayer, it doesn't have to even be a devout prayer, but as long as we continue to come to God and present our whole lives, as long as we continue to come to God and present every problem that we have, every issue that we have, as well as every blessing that we have, and even when we find ourselves in the place that the unjust judge finds himself, even when we are just pleading a case in our everyday lives and saying, God, I am not asking for much, I just want a little bit more stamina, just help me get through the end of this day. Jesus promises us that as long as we continue to offer that prayer, that as long as we continue to come over and over and over with our voices to God, that the promise that Jesus says to us is that God will do this. Listen to what the unjust judge says, and will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? And that is the blessing that we realize, that when we do give ourselves and our whole lives, including our whole hearts, to follow God, that when we give of everything that we have in our lives to follow God, we realize that we are the very ones that God has chosen to hear. That God hears our cries that we lift up to him, and will he delay long in helping them, is what Luke writes in the Holy Scriptures. Will God delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. That this is the promise that we have, is that as we continue to plead our case, as we continue to let everything that is happening in our lives, our whole hearts, our whole lives, that as we continue to share that with God, as we continue to pray for justice, as we continue to pray for courage, will God meet us like the unjust judge? Yes, God will meet us like the unjust judge, and God will also, the second promise, that is the unjust judge who will continue to hear us and then begin to intervene in our lives and in our world, but also this God will not delay long in helping us. You see, that is the promise that we have. It is the promise that we have, is that God will not delay long in helping us as we pour out our whole lives to God. But then Jesus offers one more, Jesus offers one more twist in this parable, one more turn in this parable. And that last turn comes, and yet, I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. That is, that there will be justice that is granted to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? And what I want you to do is I want you to reflect on Luke chapter 18, and particularly at verse 8. And then I want you to reflect on Luke chapter 18 at verse 1. Now these are the two verses, and I want you to somehow reflect on both of those and see if you can draw some connections in your own place. Luke chapter 18 verse 1 says this, "Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not lose heart." Now what happens then is this parable, the story of the unjust judge. This happens in the middle. But then, at the end, "And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" And so why do we have that verse about not losing heart? And why do we have that focus at the very end about when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? You see, both of those are connected. That is about our prayers that Jesus says, this is one I pray for you. This is what I pray for you. For every follower that is here, this is what I'm praying for you, that you will pray and that you will not lose heart. And I pray that it will be enough that your hearts will carry you to the very end, where when Jesus comes, Jesus will certainly find that faith on earth. You see, what happens is that when we lose our hearts, it becomes very easy to lose our faith as well. On the other hand, that when we strengthen our hearts, when we take that time to take care of our hearts, when we take those moments to guard our hearts, you know what we can expect? We can expect that our faith will begin to blossom and will begin to flourish in all of our lives. Yeah, I told you that I stayed up way too late, watching the elections, watching the results. I also went to bed that night, not knowing who the president was. They're still counting and they're still mailing ballots. Woke up the next morning still not knowing. It's a moment that for someone who enjoys politics and someone who certainly wants to know the results of the election, it's a moment that will be quite easy to lose my heart. It's a moment that even fasting from the news and doing all that I did in preparation for the election results, it would be a moment that all of those means of guarding my heart, making sure that my heart was in a good place, could easily be lost. And yet, it wasn't. Because one of the things that we know, and this is one of the things that many of us are saying and we're sharing together in our church, we're sharing it together in our community, we recognize that God is King. We recognize that Christ and Christ alone is King. We recognize that God is the one that works in our hearts, that God is the one that continues to support our hearts, no matter what the circumstances are in our world. And yet, the good news for us today is knowing that as we begin to guard our hearts, that what happens is that our faith will continue to blossom, our faith will continue to flourish until God comes on this earth, until we are able to see God as King over all the earth, not only of our lives, but of every life. As the last book in the Bible says, that when every knee shall bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And that is that moment that Jesus says that when the Son of Man comes, will the Son of Man be able to find faith on earth? Well, the Son of Man will find faith on earth. The Son of Man, Jesus, will find faith on earth when we commit ourselves to saying that in everything that happens on this earth, that we are going to guard our hearts in such a way that we are going to make sure that there will be nothing that will hamper us, nothing that will stop us, nothing that will make us lose our own hearts. And I pray that this is a place that you find yourself in today. That you find yourself in a place where your heart is not lost. If your heart is lost, very quickly, very easily you can come and you can find your heart in a place where God has, well, originally created your heart to be in. That is, that you can come to God and you can say, God, I've lost my heart. I've lost. And then you can fill in the blank and say, God, what I want you to do is I want you to forgive me. I want you to redeem my heart. I want you to create in me a new and clean heart. I want my sins. I want everything that is separated from me from living my full life in your presence. I want that to be taken away. And the promise is that God will take that away from your heart and that you can have a new and a clean heart. And from that, the promise is also that God will begin to renew your spirit within you. And that is the action that God will take in your life. And so if you are finding yourself in a place where you have lost your heart, those are some of the steps that you can begin to take. And as soon as you begin taking those steps, for every single one of us, as soon as we begin to take those steps of holding on to our hearts, not losing our hearts, we can be promised, we can know for sure that our faith will carry us till the very ends of our lives, that our faith will continue to blossom and flourish until Christ comes in final victory on this earth. Thanks so much for watching. I really do. I hope that this is helpful for you, and I pray that all of you will not lose your hearts. May God's blessings be upon all of you, both now and forevermore. Amen.